I've been thinking a lot recently about creativity and about creative endeavors, specifically creative endeavors that I would like to pursue or that I have pursued in the past. And after looking through a lot of my old art yesterday and all of my old comic projects that I have stored away in my room's closet, in like these old plastic bins, I decided that I just really wanted to talk about an old childhood comic series of mine, because I found a lot of old pages and old like conceptual covers, and it just really got me thinking about this huge, long-lasting project that I used to just really, really care about. And it went on for a while. I worked on this project in so many different forms for almost a decade, I think. It was around 10 years. So I want to talk about it, and I want to talk about the different ways that it evolved over time, and kind of where it started and where it ended up by the time that it eventually just faded into or out of relevancy. So to begin, I might as well start at the very beginning and talk about how I got into comics and just very briefly talk about where I was inspired to do this kind of thing. So I've drawn my entire life. I've always been an artist. I've always loved drawing, and I've always loved art. And comics specifically, I don't remember when I started wanting to make comics, but I do remember that I started by making stick figure comics, because those were easy to draw, repeated frames and stuff, and it was just, it was very easy to do stick figure comics because, you know, I could draw more complete pieces of people if I was just drawing a single piece, but when drawing a comic, obviously you're gonna draw a lot, so I drew stick figure comics. And I started by drawing these stick figure comics of me and my cousin, but they were Star Wars comics, and they weren't me and my cousin, except they were also Obi-Wan and Anakin as the characters, and it was just this really weird, like, kind of self-insert, kind of not self-insert kind of thing, and that's an abstract concept, and I that doesn't come across very well, but it was what I was trying to do for whatever reason. So anyway, I started by making these Star Wars stick figure comics, and of course, you know, they went on for a little bit, and then I eventually stopped. But what really, really, really got me into, like, wanting to do comics as, like, my main thing, because comics were my main thing for a very long time. They were, like, the main thing that I put my creative energy into. The thing that got me to that point was Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants is such a good series for children because it really encourages just the limitless creativity that is required to sustain that kind of interest in a child. It encourages kids to just put down whatever they think of onto the page. If they want to make something, it encourages them to make it, no matter what the response is, that kind of thing. It's really wonderful, and that really helped me a lot. That really helped nourish my creativity a lot as a kid. I love that series to death. So the main characters of Captain Underpants, George and Harold, have a comic book series, and I was like, I want to do that too. So I did, and I got into making these more, like, complete comic projects. I wanted to make, like, comic books. I didn't just want to, like, make single page comics on notebook paper like I was doing. So I started making comic books. And that leads me into my childhood ongoing comic project, The Super Kids. I know, very creatively titled, just very, it's perfect. It is a delicacy of a project title, The Super Kids. This changes later on, and I'll get into what it changes into down the line. So the beginning of the Super Kids started as actually a vent comic, which is really weird looking back on, but basically the origin of the comic was that my friends and I got in trouble at church one time because we were being a little too rowdy. And we got so mad. We were like, oh, those darn rascally adults always getting us in trouble and yelling at us. So we made this vent comic where a bunch of children, and by a bunch, I mean literally hundreds. Like, I think it was like most of the children in the world, actually, I think I was part of the story, jump into a pit of toxic nuclear waste. And they get superpowers, and they use those powers to beat up the adults. And that was literally the story. That was the first version of this project. It was just this stupid little 9-year-old's vent comic about how much they hate adults. And it was, that was fun. So that's where it started. That was the first era of the Super Kids, but eventually I kind of was like, I want to actually make this a thing. I don't want this to be like a vent comic. I like the idea of kids getting superpowers. I know, again, so original. So we turned it into another whole thing. So the first era of the Super Kids, the vent comic, soon became what I'm calling the Super Kids version 1, even though it's technically version 2. This is version 1 as in version 1 of the storytelling project, the actually creatively inspired project. So the Super Kids ended up being a story about three boys. Their names were Jordan, Jacob, and Noah. And they had the most basic character archetypes that you could possibly think of. Jordan was the smart genius who invented stuff. Noah was the stupid comedic relief guy who was really silly. And Jacob was the cool kid, and then the one who got all the ladies and played the guitar and that kind of stuff. So it was the most typical 3-character structure, the most cliche. But I was 10, so what are you gonna do? Those are the main characters, those are their archetypes. But what really gets me thinking about the first version of this project is the nature of the origin story, because what I love about, not even just specifically what I did as a kid, but what I think all creative kids do when they make a story, the inhibitionless creativity that they put into it. They like I said earlier, they will just put something down that they like and that they want to make happen, and they won't have to worry about justifying it. They won't have to worry about, threading it into the story properly and making sure it has a proper resolution and context and subtext and that kind of thing. It's literally just, hey, I want to fight a big slime monster, so I'm gonna make a slime monster happen. There's gonna be a scientist, and he goes into a lightning, and he pours a slime on him, and boom, he's a slime monster, and now they get to fight a slime monster. And that's the kind of just raw creative passion that kids put into their work, and it's so endearing. And that's what it was like for these early versions of this project. And I remember having so much fun writing and drawing these things. So I started with the new origin story, which ended up being Jordan, Jacob, and Noah. They have families, and they go snowboarding every Christmas. They go snowboarding every winter. And just one fateful November, they go snowboarding, and they fly off a ramp into a lake of toxic nuclear waste. And that is how version 1 of the Super Kids got their powers. And yeah, so that's kind of the caliber of the storytelling in that first version. And so yeah, no, it's just kind of, it was that stuff all the way through. They went on all these crazy adventures, and I would always write the stories out of order. I wouldn't ever finish the origin story. I would always be like, okay, I know how they get their powers, so I'm just gonna write the stories that happen later on. I don't think I ever finished any substantial story for these characters. I always just kind of I mean, this is a problem I even have nowadays, but I started a comic and I started a story just because I was creatively empowered and passionate to do it, and then I would just never finish it and move on to the next thing that I was creatively excited about. But I remember they had stories about cow snatchers, aliens snatching up cows. They had stories where they would fight these little rabbit creatures called hibbits, and they were like tribbles, from Star Trek. They would just multiply all the time, but they were just these little rabbit heads with no legs or arms. It was literally just the head, of a rabbit. They had a story, I mean, there was a lot of stories where like they would just like transform into things, and they would have to like deal with the trouble of being transformed into different things. And there are so many stories about like Jacob like turning evil and like turning against the group or something like that, because I was an edgy little kid. So that kind of stuff, it was just constant, pure creative energy. On to version 2. So version 2 is where I'm a little bit older. I think I'm about like 11, 12 years old at this point, and I'm starting to take my craft seriously. I'm like, no, I want to make a living out of this one day. I want to write stories, and I want people to like my stories, and I want to have something more meaty, something more well-rounded. So version 2 of the Super Kids, I turned it into this much larger scope, like focused project. And I wanted to have like a continuing story. In fact, I had like specifically a 6-book plan. I actually reintroduced the Hibbits. I remember that now. I reintroduced the Hibbits, and they were gonna be the villains for book 2. So I had like this larger scope that I wanted to do. And of course, to start, I had to rewrite book 1. And I just titled it appropriately, The Super Kids Book 1, The Beginning. And I had this brand new origin story. It was much more developed. And actually, it ended up being the most that I ever completed a comic for the Super Kids. I mean, it was long. I was coming up on like, I forget exactly how many pages, but there were a lot of them. And I got reasonably into it. I think I got about like, I'd say like a third to halfway into the story around that point. I updated the character archetypes a little bit, so they still kind of had like the same sort of smart one, naive one, cool one vibe about them, but I tried to like just put in a little more things. Like I didn't want to make the character of Noah just like this blatantly dumb, like stupid character. I just kind of made him a little more like happy-go-lucky, a little more naive. And I didn't want to make like Jacob this just cool guy, like this cool ladies man or whatever. So I just made him a little bit more like sarcastic. I made him a little more chill, a little more laid back. He wasn't like a badass. He wasn't like just like a daredevil or anything. He just became like this really chill guy. And then Jordan, I didn't want to be like this like genius who could like do no wrong and was always inventing cool stuff all the time. I just made him like a nerd kid, like a geek kid. So I grounded their personalities a little bit more for the next one. And then I created a new origin story. And this origin story involved this alien planet. And this alien planet has a ring of defense around it, like Saturn's rings, except the ring is manufactured, and it is specifically meant to protect the planet. And this ring, the super powerful defense ring, runs on this crystal that I named mica, but not like the earth mineral mica, like MICA. It was like the name mica. I don't know why. I don't know why, and I will never understand why. So that was the name of this all-powerful alien mineral that they would harvest from surrounding planets. And the story was that basically the nearby planets that this civilization had access to were running out. They were running out of this mineral. And so they take the last remaining piece of mica, and they put it on a ship to be stored safely while they search for more like excavation sites. But it turns out this prisoner of this alien civilization, who was recently going to be subjected to gladiatorial combat to the death, escapes his imprisonment and escapes with the escape pod that was originally holding the mica, and he escapes to Earth. He crash lands. He escapes from the crash site. The mica is left unattended on the crashed ship, and the ship crashes on Earth near the 3 main characters, Jordan, Jacob, and Noah. And they are the only ones there present at the crash site until the government shows up. And Jacob takes the mica and nabs it and takes it back home. And he doesn't let anybody see it. They get back to the house, and Jacob reveals that he's taken the diamond. Jordan's really angry, and they start arguing with each other. And they're like, rah, 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 rah. I can't believe you took it. I can't believe you lied to the government and said that we didn't find anything there. I can't believe that you're not letting me have this diamond because it's really expensive and I can sell it for a lot of money. That kind of thing. And so they end up fighting over it and like pulling back and forth, and like they're trying to get it from one another, and it drops on the ground and it shatters. And when it shatters, it releases this pulse of energy that causes them to black out, and they wake up with superpowers. Cut back to the alien civilization. The king, who is like this big slime monster guy, is like, we need to find out where that escaped pod went. So they go to Earth and they start scanning the area for the powerful energy that the mica is supposed to radiate, and they find it in 3 separate places, and they are the 3 kids. And so I never really got much farther past this point, but my intention was that it was just gonna be like, the king found out that these kids had absorbed the power of the diamond, and was just so mad because that was the last piece that they had on hand, and their defenses were gonna fall, and they were gonna be vulnerable to invaders and attacks from civilizations and their enemies and stuff. And so he was just gonna go on this big rampage and try and destroy the planet. Not as justified as it seemed back in the day, but you know, it worked. And so yeah, that was the original origin story, and you can already tell like the increase in scope that I was going for, and I really wanted it to be like this coherent thing. But alas, it was not good enough, because I moved on to another reboot. This next reboot is where a title change comes in, because I was about like 13, 14 at this point, and I was like, oh hey, the Super Kids is kind of a dumb children's name. And I was like, I don't want to make a story for kids, I want to make it a grown-up story for 14-year-olds. So I changed the name from the Super Kids to something else. Once again, this new name, just the most creative, just the most delectable variation upon the original name. I just shortened it to an acronym and called it T.S.K. I just called the new one T.S.K. Yes, it is short for the Super Kids, the name that I wanted to get rid of, because I didn't want to come up with a different word for the title. Are you kidding me? So I was calling this new version T.S.K. And along with the name change, there comes another, even newer origin story. And this one is even more focused and is even more tonally resonant. This one focuses on new environments and new friendship. Jordan is this character that is from out of town and recently moves into a new town, and instead of being lifelong friends with Jacob and Noah like he was in the previous ones, he is a newly found friend, and they're just meeting for the first time in this new story, and he's trying to get comfortable around him, and he feels like an outcast. This whole thing starts happening around them, and it causes them to come even closer together. So what is the new origin story? This one is a little bit more incremental than the jump between version 1 and 2. I was still a big fan of the scope of the last one, and I still liked the idea of the mica diamond, and I was like, okay, cool. So let me just take some of the stuff that I don't like from this one and change it for the new one, and then we'll work it out. So T.S.K. version 1. What's the origin story? It is basically the same thing, except for a few key details. One, the all-powerful mineral is no longer called mica, because I realized that was just a name for a guy. And if it wasn't a name for a guy, it was already an existing earth mineral, so I was like, this needs a new name. But in classic fashion, I'm a very lazy namer, so I named it Lastric, which is just an anagram of crystal. So this new mineral called Lastric was the replacement for the original mica. 2, the king of the alien civilization that attacks Earth, no longer a big slime monster guy. I created this whole new race of like furry cat aliens that like had elemental powers. So like the king was like this big icy cat guy, and it's pretty cool, actually. I actually really like it still. 3, the criminal that escapes with the Lastric, with the mica in the original one, is no longer just a random criminal. In this version, he is the prince of the civilization. His name is Scorch, and he is a little cat guy with fire powers instead of ice powers like his dad. He is a prince who does not agree with the tyranny, and he escapes with the last remaining important resource and heads to Earth in desperation. There's also a new character named Prophecy Fish, who is just Noah's goldfish. In the midst of the Lastric power surge, he gains like human sentience, and he gains like a personality and the ability to speak. And he also gains the ability to tell the future, hence the name Prophecy Fish. And one of the first things he does in the story is that he drops a prophecy on these kids. And he's like, you guys are gonna be heroes. So yeah, that was sort of like the basic gist. Again, it's more incremental, but you can kind of tell I was improving with my storytelling skills a little bit. Like I was getting a better sense of like how to establish conflict through relationships rather than just random happenstance, that kind of thing. I think I still had the 6-book plan for this one because in the original cover for this version of the story, it's still titled Book 1. And the reason I say that's important is because when I abandoned the 6-book plan in the next version, I just removed the Book 1 specification, and I just called it the beginning. So speaking of, let's go to T.S.K. version 2. So T.S.K. version 2 is actually even more minimalistic with its changes than the last version. Scorch is still there, Prophecy Fish is still there, the main story of the Lastric crystal and all that kind of stuff, that's all still there. Most of it is the same, only I removed the 6-book plan, I updated the art style and the character design, and I specified the character's powers a little bit. And so let me go into what I mean by that. So if you noticed, these are supposed to be like superhero comics, but I haven't talked much about what powers these characters have. And that's because in a lot of the first versions of the story, they didn't really have any specific powers. It was more just kind of like a plot convenience thing that they had powers. I would always just like give them general superpower abilities like strength and like flight and like fire powers and that kind of thing. And then whenever it would become necessary in the story for them to develop a new ability, I would just give them that ability as like, oh, I learned a new power. I figured out how to use my powers a little bit more. And I always justified it by like it being like, oh, the crystal didn't like give them any specific abilities. It is just this raw power source, and so it just infuses them with this raw power that they can choose to utilize however they want. But then at a certain point, I realized I was like, no, you know, that's not gonna fly very much. Oh, hey, fly, superpower joke. But I was like, no, that's not gonna hold up very well in the long run. So I started to make more of an effort to specify their powers a little bit. And I didn't go too crazy with the specification. Like I wasn't like, oh, this person has fire shooties. This person can stretch a little bit. This person has super strength and super strength only. No, I was still a little bit more general with it, but I instead of just giving them random powers based on story convenience, I sort of focused think of it like schools of magic or like classes in D&D. I assigned them different classes of powers. So like, for example, so Jordan became like this knowledge class who had like abilities of like strategy and innovation. And so I sort of was able to bring back the whole invention side to the character just a little bit with that. It was more just like brain power and critical thinking and learning how to like manipulate things and use them to your will based on like already existing things. Like one of Jordan's signature powers is the fact that he's able to use the power of the crystal that is inside of him to make like these crystallized hand structures. Like he can make like a crystallized claw on his hand, like think of like Prototype, like the game Prototype. Like he'd redistribute the crystal inside of him to make like these hand formations and like shapeshift him into whatever shape he needs them to be. So like a hammer or like I said, a claw, or like a big like slicey sword, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where like the innovation specification came from. And again, he got like increased brain power, strategic ability, alongside the general like strength and speed and reflex improvements and stuff. Noah got the creation class. So his powers sort of delve into like forming things out of not necessarily nothing, but out of nothing really established. So like, for example, and just so you know, I did this first. He has minion characters that he can create. And they're like these little stick figure minions. And so like he can just make these things appear out of thin air whenever he needs, and they're like just these little, like, they're kind of comedic relief, but they're mostly just there on the side to help him out whenever he needs. And he can just make these things in like different forms and stuff, and he's able to create like formations and stuff and like illusions and that kind of thing. And so like he has, his power is more focused in like creativity and illusion magic. And then Jacob, for the third one, is combat and just like raw power abilities. So like he has like all of these elemental abilities that are just mainly meant for destruction. Yeah, so I focus them down into these like classes instead of just being like, oh, you get this one when you need it, you get this one when you need it. And yeah, so that's kind of what it ended up being. And then you've been looking at the updated art style, so I don't really have to talk about that much. I just gave them like more specific like styles than just, you know, like different shirt colors. Different hairstyles specifically was also a big one, specifically for Jordan and Jacob. That leads us to the final version, T.S.K. version 3. This is the version that was developed right before just slowly fading from relevancy. And there was actually a pretty large gap in between developing this version of the story and the previous version, version 2. This version was one that I developed with my cousin. It was just really super late one night, and I was just talking about how I kind of wanted to do something different with T.S.K. because it had been a while since I had really talked about it or worked on it. And so we just ended up getting into this like really lengthy, like multi-hour discussion about giving a completely new story and a new energy to the concept. And when I say new story and new energy, I mean like from the ground up. Pretty much everything except for the main characters and the names of those main characters is completely different. So the designs updated even further, even more specification, even more of a difference in style, new hairstyles, just new outfits, that kind of thing. So that was updated even further, but that's not even the biggest update. The biggest update came in the form of the tone and the completely new, just insane story that we came up with. And I don't remember a lot of the details of it, so I'm not gonna go into the details of it, but we just came up with like this whole, basically like a pitch bible of like just this whole new story. And the gist of it was that Jordan was still a new arrival to the town, moves into the town, meets these new people, is very uncomfortable there. That still basically stays the same. But there's no more like alien civilizations in the story. It's not like an alien invasion story like the previous ones were. And in fact, you don't really know how they get their powers initially. What happens is the characters meet, some stuff happens, they kind of like establish their personalities, establish their friendship. They wake up one day and they just have this sickness, like just this dizziness, this disorientation. And soon this disorientation and dizziness turns into development of these strange, surreal abilities that they start to develop. And I imagine they're somewhat similar to the power classes that I had in the previous version. And they just start manifesting these abilities and it freaks them out and they don't know where they came from. They just know they woke up one morning and this dizziness and this sickness and this disorientation is met with these new powers, and it becomes like this multi-dimensional like timeline loop story where like they have to like go into the past, and once they go into the past they like release their consciousness into the universe, and like their consciousness from the past like is like sustained throughout the timeline until it eventually just like merges into their present timelines and gives them these abilities that they once had in like a previous life. and like there's like this big like darkness, like world-eating creature that is threatening the Earth in the cosmos outside, and they're the only ones able to stop it because the creature is the one that like infused them with this power because it comes from itself, and like they're developing power for the creature, and the creature is gonna like suck away their life force in order to regain this power that they're using and developing. And like, it is just this crazy thing, and I don't even know if it's any good thinking about it, but I do know that it was the last version of the story and that nothing ever truly came of it except for conceptualization. But it's fun to talk about, and ultimately that's just what I'm here to do. I just wanted to take some time to talk about this old project that used to be so important to me. I don't know how this discussion like came out. I've been talking for about 40 minutes, but I don't really know if I've really said anything. I guess I just wanted to talk about this and just talk about the fact that I just really appreciate looking back and witnessing just the raw, unfiltered creativity that I once had, you know, that wasn't hindered by like storytelling standards, and you know, I feel like in a way you sort of lose that if you care too much. Criticism is important, and it's good to have a standard, but it's also good to get back into that mindset of just creating, you know, just to make something, just making something that you like, just because you like it, and not having to worry about like justifying it. There's nothing cringe about genuine, passionate creativity. And that's what this was for me. This was my joy project. So yeah, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to me ramble about my old childhood series, and I hope you've enjoyed the visuals, because I'm recording this audio thing before I do it, but I assume that I've been recording myself redrawing the different versions of the characters and stuff, so I hope you've enjoyed that. Anyway, I love you all very much. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you later.